Hi, and welcome back to Chapter 2. We're going to be covering recipe calculations. And I skipped over this section in the beginning because it is quite dense. There is quite a bit of acronyms used in the text, which I found to be a little excessive and confusing. The last page of the notes that I gave you guys and the 2 slides in this lecture are those acronyms as they appear in the text. So refer to that if you ever get lost or confused. In the end, these are all simple math equations, and I mean simple as in addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. But it is sorting through the information from the specific scenarios and converting between units of measurement that complicates this culinary math. So don't get too hung up on the details and try to find your own understanding of these concepts presented. And some of these calculations are applicable to regular daily life, while others are typically only used in the culinary industry. Our learning outcomes, we should feel comfortable knowing how to increase or decrease the recipe yield. And the yield is just the expected amount of a finished product. And we will also consider and determine portion sizes. We're going to learn how to adjust the portion sizes and the total yield. So, for example, that would be if we had 4 portions of a product that is 6 ounces and we need to convert into 15 portions of 4 ounces. We will learn how to do that. We're also going to discover the unit price when buying in bulk, yield percentage, edible portion cost, and butcher's yield test. So quick note on the metric system, because this is, you'll see this quite frequently. This is a system that is used throughout most of the world, and it is a decimal system based on the multiples of 10. The basic units of weight are grams. For volume, you would use liters, and then for length, meters. And prefixes are added to the basic units to indicate larger or smaller units. So that is this chart here we have on the right. Some units of measurement that you might be familiar with would be like kilo as in kilogram or centi as in centimeter. The other items are a little too small or too big for us to use in our daily lives, but it's all good information to know. And the metric system in the culinary world, the most commonly used units of measurement would be grams, as in kilograms, that's weight. Liters, you might see as milliliters, and that measures volume. Centimeters measures length, and then Celsius is for temperature. And that's in comparison to like ounces and pounds that we typically see, or any of the hand tools that we have in the kitchen, as in teaspoons, tablespoons, fluid ounces, cups, pints, quarts, gallons, all that stuff. So these are our more practical applications of culinary math. To adjust the yield, you need to find the recipe conversion factor. And in order to do that, you take your new desired yield, divided that by the original yield of the recipe, and that gives you our recipe conversion factor. So the easiest example I can give you guys is a recipe that yields 12 muffins, but you actually need 24. So you would take 24 divided by 12, and that would give you 2. And that 2 is our recipe conversion factor, essentially meaning that you are doubling the recipe. But you can use this equation to increase or decrease the final amount, and make sure that you multiply the recipe conversion factor to all ingredients. This step may require converting between units of measurement. It may require some rounding to reasonable quantities, or you may need to make a judgment call on how ingredients scale up or down. You would typically see this more when you are cooking and rather than baking. Baking tends to be a very exact and precise science. So make sure that you follow the recipe conversion factor and the numbers that it gives you. But when you're cooking, say like if you have spices that are scaled up or scaled down, feel free to make adjustments as you see fit. If you needed to convert portion sizes, that's just an extra step onto this process. And it requires you determining a total yield that you can plug into this original equation. So you would very simply take the number of portions that you have or need, times that by the portion size, which is a weight, and that will give you a total yield. And then from there, you just take those weights, plug it into the recipe, the excuse me, the equation that we just learned, and that will give you a recipe conversion factor. This is just another visual on everything that I have written there. So again, you need to find your conversion factor, which is just your new desired yield divided by the original yield. That gives you a single number, and you take that number and you times it by all the ingredients in the recipe. And that is how you scale a recipe. Calculating the price per unit, also termed calculating the as purchased cost. So you would take your as purchased cost divided by the number of units in a pack, and that gets you price per unit, or the individual price of a single item. So you would use this when you're purchasing something in bulk and you want to calculate the cost of each item. A practical application here is we could use this technique to compare prices between single items and bulk items. So an example, one roll of paper towel for $2.25 or a pack of 6 for $10.50. Upon initial viewing of this price difference, you may not know which is the better deal, but some simple math will help you discover if it is or not. So I took the as purchase cost, which is $10.50. I'm going to divide that by the 6 rolls of paper towel in that case, and that gave me $1.75 per roll. So now we've discovered that yes, the bulk item is a better deal than the individual roll of paper towel. Moving on to the more restaurant applications, we're going to discover how to find a yield percentage. So this is a fairly easy concept. You take your quantity purchased minus the trimmed amount, and that gets you an edible portion. From there, your edible portion is divided by your quantity purchased, and that gets you a yield percentage. So you would use this when you want to understand how much of the product is actually usable. So I'm going to walk you through this example I have here. 15 pounds of brisket will be trimmed of 3 pounds, 3 ounces of fat. And we are going to discover the yield percentage from this information. So I took 15 pounds minus 3 pounds, 3 ounces of fat, and that brought me to 11 pounds, 13 ounces. We're going to divide that by 15 pounds, but the first step we have to take is making sure that these are in the same unit of measurement. We need to work with the smallest unit that they have in common, which is ounces. So I'm going to take 11 pounds times by 16 because there are 16 ounces in a pound, plus that extra 13 ounces here, and that brought me to 179. 15 times by 16 is 240, so now we can go ahead and move forward with our equation. 179 ounces divided by 240 ounces gave us 0.745, which is our yield percentage. It's just not in percentage form. So take that number times by 100 and we get 75%. So you know that when you are holding a whole piece of brisket, just arrived, still in the package, you now understand that 75% of that brisket is edible. Speaking of edible portions, if you were unable to do the trimming yourself and you're just working on a known yield percentage, you can easily calculate your expected edible portion from that. You take the quantity purchased divided by the yield percentage, and that gives you an edible portion weight. And if you needed to figure out a number of portions that you could get determined by a specific size of portions, you would take edible portion divided by portion size, and that gets you a number of portions. So an example here is if 10 pounds of asparagus is bought and you are anticipating serving 4 ounces of that asparagus, and asparagus typically has a 56% yield rate. Plugging in all of our information, I'm taking 10 pounds divided by 0.56, our yield percentage, and that's going to get me an edible portion. But because I also have this portion size included and it is in ounces, I'm going to go ahead and convert the pounds I have here into ounces just so it's a little easier to work with. So 10 times 16 gets us 160 ounces total divided by our yield percentage, which is 56. That gets us 89.6 ounces of asparagus trimmed, ready to go. That is our edible portion. And then the next step here is discovering how many portion sizes or how many portions we can get out of that. So I take 89.6 divided by 4, and that gets us 22.4 portions available. So now, as a kitchen manager or head chef, I understand that when I buy 10 pounds of asparagus, I can expect to serve 22 portions from that. To calculate the edible portion cost, so this is the actual cost per pound, including the trim. This requires us to take our as purchased cost and divide it by the yield percentage, and that accurately prices the edible portion for us. This is used to help cost out recipes to obtain a more accurate menu price, so you are charging for any loss that you experience in the prepping process. An example here is we bought 3 pounds of carrots. They were $1.20 per pound, and carrots have a 75% yield rate. You would first find out your as purchased cost. So that is 3 pounds times by $1.20, and that gets you $3.60. You would take $3.60, divide that by the 75% yield rate, and you are now at $4.80. So accommodating for the waste that you experience, cutting off the greens, peeling the sides, calculating that into the price, you're actually paying $4.80. But because we were given price per pound, I just want to calculate a little further to show you the difference. So $4.80 divided by the 3 pounds that we bought, that gets us to $1.60 per pound. So if you want to order considering the trim, this is the equation that you would use. So you know the edible portion size that you need. You can just determine the yield percentage in, whichever way, looking it up online, looking in a book, doing a yield test yourself. And that is going to give you a weight of what you need to order to ensure that you have enough product. So the example I gave us here is we need 20 portions of Brussels sprouts, and a portion of Brussels sprouts is 6 ounces. So this portion, this size right here, 6 ounces, means it is a edible 6 ounces. So that means the Brussels sprouts were trimmed of their ends, potentially even cut in half. So our trim in Brussels sprouts are the ends and any fallen leaves. Those are the things that the customer does not see. And those are the items that are not included in this 6 ounce portion. So I need 120 ounces of cleaned, ready to go, ready to eat Brussels sprouts. However, Brussels sprouts has a 74% yield rate. So when I buy a pound of Brussels sprouts, I need to accommodate for that 74% yield rate. So plugging in our information that we have, our edible portion, I need 120 ounces because 20 portions times by 6 ounces, 120. Our yield percentage is 74%, and that brings me to 162 ounces. And just to see what that looks like in pounds, because that's typically how we would be ordering Brussels sprouts, I take 162 divided by 16, and that gets us 10 pounds of Brussels. So now I know that when I order 10 pounds of Brussels sprouts, I'm going to definitely get 20 portions of 6 ounces out of that. Butcher's yield test. So these are the steps that we take in order to discover the amount of usable meat and trim. And this calculates the value of all edible cuts. So this includes the portion of meat and also the value of anything else that comes out, the bones, and usable trim that can be used for other items. These are the steps as they appear in the book. It did get a little wordy and it didn't have a lot of examples attached to it. So I actually found a really good video that we're going to watch to go over it to get like a more practical feel for it. But pretty much this is just a really involved process of weighing the meat, trimming the meat, separating meat, fat, bones, usable trim, weighing all of that, and yeah, doing a lot of different calculations. So I thought instead of me explaining just through this list, because it is a little difficult to do, for me, it's difficult to combine like words and then math. So I found this video that I thought was actually fairly helpful. So let's go ahead and watch this.
Hello, it's Gregory Bloom, the Beef Pro, and today we're going to show you how to cut tenderloin steaks out of a whole tenderloin so that you can have restaurant quality steaks at home. First thing you need to do is buy a whole tenderloin. These are called Pismo tenders, which means peeled side muscle off, the industry standard way of selling tenderloins. Using a long, sharp knife, first thing you want to do is remove the fat and silver skin from the tenderloin. Now don't worry about going fast like we are here for our video. Just take your time. Find that natural seam between these two muscles and carefully cut down the center and remove the side muscle. We'll set that aside. Use it for something later. The silver skin comes off very easily. Just keep your knife tip pointed up towards the ceiling slightly so that you don't dig into the meat. This is the most tender muscle on the beef carcass, which is also why it's the most expensive. So to get a good yield and maximize your profitability if you're a restaurant operator, you want to get a good yield and cut these carefully. Now on the back side, there's no silver skin, but there is some wedge fat, this piece right here that we're going to cut out. This is one of the most versatile muscles because it can be cooked so many different ways. Grilled, fried, oven roasted. Now we're ready to cut steaks. Face the head there, the butt end of the tender there. Face it to get a nice flat edge and start cutting your steaks. At home, you'd probably just start cutting these by thickness rather than by weight. If you like a 1-inch steak, cut a 1-inch steak. If you like your steaks thicker, fine. But normally 1 to 1.5 inches is great. We're weighing these because these are for a restaurant, and the restaurant ordered 8-ounce steaks, so we're weighing each steak. The center part of the tenderloin is called the Chateaubriand, and it's a great roast. Now, if you didn't get your tender steaks trimmed up as nice as we got ours, and there's still some silver skin or some fat left on them, you can just take each individual steak and trim them up, kind of like we're doing here to size them. Now, for food service professionals, I'm going to go ahead and weigh everything so that I can show you how we do a food cost and a yield test. So we're going to weigh our scraps. You would want to do this if you're cutting your own tenderloins in your own restaurant. So let's go ahead and do our yield calculation now to see what our food cost is for restaurant operators. You take your start weight and you subtract your trim loss, your tender tails, and your steak weight, and you'll get a usable yield of 60%, which you get by dividing your end weight by your beginning weight. If you know you have a 60% usable yield, if you paid $12.50 a pound for the tenders, and you divide that by 0.6, you'll get a number, $20.83. $20.83 times 4.03 pounds of steaks equals $83.95. Divide that by 8, you paid $10.50 per steak. And I hope you'll go enjoy a beef tenderloin steak.
If I could figure out how to get to our next slide. There we go. So, yeah, here are those acronyms. Acronyms for our butcher's yield test. And that concludes our revisit to chapter 2. So hopefully this makes a little more sense. Please refer to the notes that we have available. And we are going to move on to an assignment and hopefully put these acronyms and equations to good use.